I am a committed educator to liberating educational experiences, and I am just so grateful once again to be here. You'll hear me saying that a lot, grateful, grateful, gratitude, because that is truly how I feel. So when you feel it, speak it out into the world, right? So before we get started though, I wanted to take some time to acknowledge the space and the land that we are on here today, and also at the Readery. And so we're located on stolen ancestral Seminole and Tequesta land. The Readery makes this acknowledgement to remind ourselves that by being here today, we strive to remedy this injustice through our beliefs and actions in rooting content and anti-racist work and disrupting colonized pedagogies. So I say all of this not to be performative, but because I actually had a conversation before the Readery even opened with Dr. Guzman, who is the head of Native American and Global Indigenous Studies at the University of Miami. And they actually just started this program about a little over a year ago. They opened this program to all in terms of attending webinars and meetings and things of that nature. So I encourage you also to look at that program because they're doing some incredible work. But I say all of that because I too am committed to really doing my part and not just saying something to be performative, but to really act it out and be an ally and abolitionist in this work with communities that have allowed me to speak freely on this land. So wanted to share that first. I also wanted to, is it?
Oh, it's just the arrow.
Yeah. Well, I'm also a Taekwondo instructor. Yeah, no,
Let me try.
okay, sorry.
No, you're all good.
While we're waiting though, I also wanted to just pay honor and respect to those who have come before me to allow me to authentically speak my truth and unapologetic truth. My ancestors and family members who have been committed to the fair and equitable treatment of human beings, the historically marginalized communities who have been laying the groundwork for a very long time around activism. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge these groups because there's a feeling once again of gratitude and inspiration for those who've had the courage to speak on all injustices, especially when it pertains to children. The work that I am doing is not new. I am no pioneer. When people say the word pioneer, I'm always like, no, there are people who have come before us who've been doing this work for so long. We are just being given the opportunity to share in the work and to hopefully be good ancestors ourselves to the future generations. So wanted to share that.
This one's being temperamental right now. So I'll just slide through
Okay,
it.
all right, thank you. Thanks. So before we get started into the power of liberating storytelling and how it connects to your work, I wanted to really set us up in just groundwork together, something called restorative practice, restorative thinking. This is something that I actually did with my pre-K babies all the way up to my 4th grade babies. They're all my babies. Now they're in 12th grade and graduated and they're still my babies. But I wanted to ground us in this work together because research shows that white culture, specifically American white culture, places preference and emphasis on individualistic behaviors over community-driven practices. And I know that you're all here today because you believe in community-driven practice that empower the whole. In my classroom, we would really sit together every morning and ground ourselves around the liberation of the soul. And my 4-year-olds could even tell you what liberation meant. I believe that children are never too young to know the truth, as what Erica Huggins, who is a Black Panther Party activist from Oakland, California, she gave me the advice that children are never too young to know the truth. So this was something that we did. We're all carrying trauma. We're all carrying heaviness and oftentimes wondering if we are meant for certain spaces. I know for myself, I'm constantly asking myself, am I meant to be in this space? Like even today, driving here, just trying to give myself positive affirmations like, I am here, I belong, I am meant to be here, I belong, I'm meant to be here. And you have to tell yourself over and over. And much of the time, social emotional learning, mental health services, therapy are based on whiteness and are oftentimes used as another form of policing. So really thinking about this work, I wanted to talk about this before because I want us to first come together and really ground ourselves in this work. You know, this is more than a presentation. It's an opportunity for us to learn together, and that each story is valuable and essential to belonging and human connection. I'm so grateful for the breakfast this morning and the community table, because it wasn't just an opportunity to sit and have breakfast, which I too love breakfast, but it was just a wonderful time to learn about each other. It was almost like another beautiful way of grounding ourselves in this work and knowing that there are no hierarchy situations in this space right now. There's no ranking, there's no status classification. And the goal right now for me is to also be able to nourish positive and wonderful relationships with you. I had the opportunity to learn from so many of you this morning already. So I want to continue that. So what I'd like to do right now is just take a few moments to practice this idea of restorative practice. Typically, we would be in a circle, but because of the way that we're arranged right now, we're actually going to just do this in our individual spaces. And I also wanted to acknowledge that this restorative practice, which a lot of schools right now are claiming as their own, or as something that's part of an SEL curriculum, this actually dates back to Indigenous practices and Ubuntu from South Africa as well. And so this practice of restorative thinking and restorative justice goes back to Navajo Nation. So what we're actually going to do right now is just kind of go through the process of growth, nurturing, healing, and integration with each other. So if you feel comfortable, what I'd like for us to do is just take a minute right now and go ahead and close your eyes if you're comfortable with that. Make sure your feet are just flat if possible. I'm thinking about all accessibilities as well. If you can put your hands on your knees. And just right now, take a moment. This is what we would do with my kindergartners and all ages. Just take a deep breath in. And take a deep breath out. Take another deep breath in. And just let your muscles relax. Honor the space that you are here today and the fact that you made it here today. With our little ones, we would ask them to actually in a circle say their name and how they're feeling. But for this sake, I'd like for you to just tell yourself how you're feeling in this moment and give yourself permission to feel the authenticity of that feeling. Know that the work that you're doing every day is contributing to the betterment of our community, whether you're interacting with someone or sitting and just thinking about what your future is, whether it's in the next 5 minutes, the next 5 days. Take one more deep breath in. Remind yourself that your story is important to this work. Your story is important no matter what. One more deep breath in. And deep breath out. And open your eyes. And just wiggle if you want. And just know that this is a space where we're all here to learn together and be together. Thank you for joining me in that practice of restorative work. And feel free at any point, if you need to do that for yourself. As we're going through this presentation, if you're feeling any type of emotion, if you're feeling empowered to move around, If you're feeling like you need to close your eyes and just breathe, know that this is a place where you can also just be completely and authentically yourself so that you can be a better person for yourself and for the world as the day continues. So if I could have someone read this quote right here. Yeah, thank you.
So many of our choices and behaviors are reflections and remnants of what our ancestors had to do to survive.
Thank you so much. And what was your name?
Antonia.
Antonia. Thank you so much, Antonia. So this quote right here, I want us to take right now 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to reflect on this quote and either write down, or you can keep it in your mind, whatever works best for you, all learning types. What words come to mind when you hear this quote, when you see this quote, when you read this quote? Write all the words down that come to mind for you. Go ahead and do that now. I'll give you a little warning when it's about to be over. So many of our choices and behaviors are reflections and remnants of what our ancestors had to do to survive. By Christine Platt. What are the words that come to mind? Maybe feelings, maybe be a person, an experience. Maybe it's a place. It's somewhere you grew up, a street you grew up on. It's a school you went to, a teacher you had. But what words come to mind? About 2.5 more minutes. It's in school, 2 more minutes, 2 more minutes. About 30 more seconds. Go ahead and wrap up your final words, final thoughts, final emotions, experiences. Now, what I'd like for you to do is turn and talk to a community member, and we're going to take about 30 seconds to share what words, if you feel comfortable, only if you feel comfortable with sharing, what are some of the words that came to your mind, and not even telling the story of why, just want to hear the words. I know it's a little hard because there's always that story, right? So just sharing those words. So I'll give you 30 seconds. Go ahead and do that now. All right, and you can turn back to me in 3, 2, 1. I'm done. I usually do peanut butter jelly. That's how my kids would turn and talk, but I thought I would refrain from doing that and just do a little clapping. Maybe next time. So I'm actually not going to have anyone share out those words. I know that those words are very personal, but the reason I had you write these words down is because these are the words that you'll want to hold on to. They'll be the ones that you share with people. There'll be the ones that you carry on. There'll be the words that you lean on, especially through the challenges and tribulations that you go through, especially in your social entrepreneurship journey. And those will be the words that you oftentimes forget. I was talking to Sarika about this, but 3 years ago, I presented at the Gates Foundation for their US K-12 programming, and thank you. And I was reflecting on that conversation at that meeting, and there were so many words and experiences that I felt that helped me get to this point here. But oftentimes, especially in entrepreneurship, you're going through so many different pieces. You're transitioning from, for me, the world of education into, okay, now I'm running a business. Now I need to figure out how to get the finances and how to get the marketing and the PR and this and that. And it's not that you ever lose sight of your passion, but there are powerful words. We know that words carry so much meaning that sometimes we forget those words that brought us to this place in the very beginning. And so I say that this exercise can be powerful because I try to do this now every so often, because I always think about my ancestors, and I think about, okay, I need to take a few minutes to remember the words that brought me here. And every time I do that, it will help me find strength and unapologetic truth in the way that I speak with others about what I feel passionate about. So I hope that you'll hold on to these words, and maybe even 5, 10 years from now, you'll be able to reflect on some of these words that even just that you experienced in this moment. But I also just want to pay honor to Christine Platt. So she has an incredible book in our readery for the adult section, because adults need love too. Christine Platt wrote the Afro-Minimalist Guide to Living with Less. But not only does she connect this idea of minimalism, which people are talking about a lot these days, but she talks about it in relation to ancestry. And she talks about it in relationship to cultural identity. So it's a beautiful book. She just had an NPR interview as well. So I highly recommend listening to that. But this quote was actually from that NPR interview. And then this is a photograph of my ancestors. So Rohi's Readery is actually Rohini, and that's named after my grandmother. And my grandmother, my Annama in Hindi, is actually this cute little peanut right there, and powerful woman. So Rohini was actually an education activist in India. So she fought for the emancipation of women's rights, but also for children's rights, especially with the caste system in colonized India. So she was a powerful force. She was also mentee to freedom fighter Sarojini Naidu, who, if you don't know, she was actually coined the Nightingale of India for her literary work and activism. So there is this intertwined piece of literacy, activism, speaking your truth within this little sweet face right here, who you'll see another picture of her at the end. But I'm always thinking about her, and I'm always thinking about her siblings and my great grandmother who fought so hard for me to even have the opportunity to speak here today. Everything connects, so I'm very grateful for her. And that's me. That's me in India. That was actually, my mom was dressing me up as Krishna during my first year. But if I could have someone else read this quote for me. Yeah, in the back, thank you.
Seen and heard it so close to being loved that for an average person it is almost
Indistinguishable.
Thank you so much. And what is your name? Lily. Lily? Nice to meet you. Thank you, Lily. So this quote I absolutely love. It's by Sean Hardnett, who's the founder of the Statesman Academy for Boys in DC. He is all about identity-driven learning, all about storytelling. But I use this quote a lot because I think of my babies, but I also think of us as adults. You can tell me you love me. You can say it over and over and over and over, but the power of being seen and heard, it transcends all feelings. That right there is the piece that allows you to feel loved. And so I share this picture over here too, is because that I always think of, that was me in what I say is purest form. Children are humanity in its purest form. And so I want to take you down a little road of my own experiences. So when I was 2, my family and I moved. Actually, it was just my mom and I moved from India to the US. My dad had been here for a little bit, so my mom was taking care of me alone in India. And we moved to the deep South, Texas to be exact. Culture shock indeed, right? When I was 10, had been told I wasn't smart, but I worked hard. I couldn't, you work hard. At 15, I began to feel isolated, depressed, called a terrorist, and post 9/11 was also surrounded oftentimes with my family with police cars due to suspicious calls of our family and the way we looked, all in the deep South. At 23 was my first attempt at suicide. It was right in the middle of graduate school. Starting to feel lost, isolated, unworthy, assimilating, but still not finding a sense of self-pride. At 30, I began to reflect on my experiences, but even when you're trying to reflect and you're doing it on your own, there are narratives that are building in your mind constantly still. I didn't feel like I had the support systems. I also came from a culture that did not acknowledge mental health supports. So lack of seeing myself subconsciously, even though I was trying to help myself, trying to put the pieces together of the experiences of oppression and racism, not only that I had experienced, but had seen from my family on a day-to-day basis, but did not actually internalize or think I was internalizing. At 36, holding my daughter in the Readery, no more than 30 minutes from here, and having been told by people coming in, shouting at me with my daughter on my hip, go back to where you came from, go back to where you both came from, to a 16-month-old, telling us that we didn't belong here, we're indoctrinating, how dare we use this space? And I say this all because being seen and being heard, and the lack of being seen and being heard, and the sense of belonging can be destructive to anyone's soul at anyone's age. Whether you are 2 years old, 36, in your 70s, you name it. I also tell this story because I want you to know more about the purpose of the Readery, but then I also want to get back into the why of the Readery. This is a brief description of the story of the Readery and how I've come to get here, but I want to tell you more about the why because later you're going to be sharing that during an exercise. So all of those experiences is to say why I have Rohi's Readery. It's a social justice driven children's bookstore and learning center committed to honoring the stories of historically marginalized communities. So, thank you. Whether it's Black, Indigenous, Asian, Arab, Latin, Latino, Latina, Pacific Islander, the neurodiverse community, the disability community, the LGBTQIA+ community, the intersection of these communities, whether it is historical truths that need to be told, authentic, real truths, because there's a lot of books out there that tell you truths, but are not written by the people who've experienced those things. It's all here for our babies. They're revolutionary readers. But we also say that for our adults, because you read something, you learn something, you share it with the world. You read something, you learn something, you share it with the world. And that's what our babies say to keep them knowing that they are revolutionary readers. It's not just about what you read, it's about how literacy carries social action. Literacy carries social action. Literacy carries social action. So this is the space. It's a space for you to feel empowerment, accessibility to safety, a sense of belonging, a sense of being loved, a sense to be yourself, whether you are crying, whether you are joyful, whether you are laughing, whether you are in silence, no matter what. Whether it's our sensory corner here for our babies who just need a soft and quiet spot, not even with the book, but just a soft and quiet spot to be. Whether it's all of the books that have the faces and of the covers shown so that our babies can actually see themselves, because part of reading is not just reading the words. Like I said, if you're looking at the cover of a book, that's carrying social action because you're seeing yourself, because you're connecting with another. Whether it is our adult section, because we have adult book clubs too. We just had our first adult book club of the 1619 project, part 1 for women of color. It was a powerful, powerful book club experience. We have a stage, bless you, for storytelling, because we know that many cultures actually come from the power of oral storytelling. But oftentimes when we're in schools, it's talked as if only writing is storytelling. But there's so many different forms of storytelling in which our stories are carried on, in which we know about our ancestry and our past. So how do we show our babies that no matter what type of talking and expression you're using, even it's through dance, through body, through movement, through what have you, that is a form of storytelling and literary experience. Or a bookmaking station, where they have identity-driven experiences. There's mirrors that say, I belong, I am strong, I matter. You can make a book, you can write a book, you can be the storyteller of your experience. The things that we're talking about today, we're teaching our babies as early as 2 and 3 years old, sitting in those chairs saying, you own your story. Your name carries power. Your name carries meaning. The color of your skin, your gender identity, no matter what, when you see yourself in that mirror, no one knows you better than you. So we have all of this in the Readery. We're also ADA compliant. Just want to say that. You can go to the next. Thank you. And I could tell you about the demographics, and I'll give you a little bit more about it. I could tell you the demographics of the Readery, but what I wanted to show you first are the loving faces that we are honored to serve. There's a story behind each and every face. each and every experience. There's empowerment, there's accessibility to belonging. There's a commitment to safety of self and each other. You'd be surprised when people come in, even if they've never met each other, there's a sense of taking care of each other, whether it's the adults taking care of each other or it's two families who've come in and their kids start playing together and one kid goes off into the sensory corner. The other family member or caregiver is like, oh, where's your child? Just want to check in. There's a sense of community and belonging. And I feel like that contributes to our power in storytelling, that sense of belonging. There's this commitment right here that we're all in this together. And oftentimes, especially in Florida, and I can only speak from my experience, but it's hard to feel safe in your own identity. For me personally, it has been very hard to feel safe in spaces, to be authentically me, to talk about belonging, but yet trying to assimilate and trying to actually do the very opposite of that, trying to fit in. And so I wanted to show you these faces because these are the babies that are going to be telling stories one day. They're going to be doing this work. They're going to be following your lead by the businesses and the work that you're doing and seeing themselves, seeing those windows and mirrors of opportunities and knowing that they too can accomplish what we are doing today. And you'll hear these words over and over that I say: storytelling, transparency, empowerment, accessibility, safety. Those are the words that I carry with me that have gotten me into the work of business. And so here are some of the voices of our community in regards to the Readery. And I share these voices because they're a part of that quote in the very beginning about the choices and the decisions you make based on your ancestry. These quotes resonate so much with me around this unapologetic truth in ensuring that, yes, there are consequences of maybe having a store like Rohi's Readery in Florida, but the work and the human connection in the community that's being built is so much greater than those consequences. But once again, I say this by saying that I am grateful for those who have come before me who have had much harsher consequences of doing that. I will always go back to that. So a few of the community voices. As a father of one adorable little brown-skinned girl and another due in 7 weeks, I'm always looking out for books that speak to her experience. Another community member. I wish I had a space like this growing up. Imagine how I could have felt about myself, what I could have been. Another community member. I see myself everywhere. There are so many girls with my skin color. I want to bring my book to school. That was a 5-year-old. Literally pulled every book that looked like her and then was like, I'm going to bring these to school. And then at the end, I am a trans man with autism whose family will not identify me by my proper pronouns. I want to share this book and let them know I am not the only one. And that's actually a book called Growing Up Trans. It's an incredible book that's actually written by high schoolers who identify with the trans community. And what's also really amazing about this book is that if you've heard of the Compass Center that is focused around LGBTQIA+ youth and community, they've also talked about doing a trans support group and using resources like this for family members to support their youth as young as 5, 6 years old, all the way up into their teens as well. So there are books that might be banned in schools, but they're not banned at the Readery. Come to the Readery if you want all your banned books. And so telling you a little bit more about the storytelling of the Readery and the business and the why before going into my personal story. So I wanted to just share a little bit about the statistics. So I did a handful, quite a few empathy interviews with community members to just gauge, what they felt about the Readery, because the last thing I ever want to do is go into a space that does not feel the community need. I never want to intrude in a space that does not see a need for it. And I think that kind of carries with all of our work. We want to make sure that we are aligned with the community because they are the voice at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day. So connecting with community members, over 77 or 78% of the people who I did surveys with identified with the mission of the Readery in terms of identifying as part of a marginalized community within the Readery. So whether it was the disability, neurodiverse, Black, Indigenous, Asian, Arab, Latinx, Pacific Islander, the LGBTQIA plus community, they represented that community. And what you can see is that of that percentage, literally almost every person said that they do not feel validated in their identity in society in some way, shape, or form. And the people who did were people who did not identify with the marginalized community. And what's really sad is that this is also reflective of almost every age. So a child as young as 6 years old could tell me that they don't see themselves in the school setting, in a toy store setting, in a public setting that has advertisements of different models and different abilities and sizes and you name it. But most people did not feel validation in society in every space. Yes, there were certain spaces, but not overall, like that wasn't their overall feeling. And then 100% though of people did say that they would recommend this space because by the end of their experience, a lot of people came in either experiencing a window by understanding someone else's story, or they came in seeing a mirror of themselves, but then 100% left feeling both. So that was really exciting to know that, okay, from every different type of community, there is someone that is at least learning the story of another too. And so I share that with you because that is what led to this idea that 100% would recommend this space to a friend, colleague, or community member. And so when I spoke to the community, interestingly, even for those who did not identify with a marginalized community, 0% believe that representation is placed as a priority in education and for-profit spaces. 0%. So even in the business space where you're hearing people putting these beautiful grand statements around DEI work and this is what our commitment is, and then less than 30% of that funding is actually going into actionable items for that committee, which often happens. Many of the people that are even working in those spaces, these multi-million-dollar spaces that have funding for it, or even the smaller spaces, are not seeing this as a priority. So what is your story and what is your work going to do to change that? Because we know that systems right now are broken purposely. It's not that it was just, when people say we have to fix the system, it's also, wait, but it can't be fixed if it was, yeah, exactly. It was purposely made that way. So what are we going to do to dismantle systems and recreate and get into the messiness and the liberation of that experience? How is all of our work going to contribute to that? And maybe it's not with a big company, maybe it's you're doing your very own thing and you're influencing those companies. Attendance. So most people then were recommended by another member to come in. So that feeling of safety, it expands beyond you. you bring someone in. But then only 33% of people typically feel safe in their society. That's a really, and I imagine it's even lower. But 33%, and that includes our little ones that were telling us that they didn't feel safe in their communities. We already talked about this around windows and mirrors, but I share all of this because I keep wanting to connect my experiences and timeline of the feeling of safety and belonging and all of these things as an educator, as a human being, to entrepreneurship. And the fact that none of like what I was doing before was business oriented, but somehow found a way to connect it into a business like Rohi's Readery. And so thinking about the choices and sacrifices that were made in this experience, sorry. We opened this store during the height of the pandemic. We opened this readery with a newborn right there who almost didn't make it in her first weeks of life. We opened this space on our own because many people that we had talked to before about it even said, do you think you can do this? Do you think it's possible? Do you know what you're going to run up against? And so the sacrifices that you make, and you constantly think about this when you're putting out your work, which is your story, and you all know this because you're in social entrepreneurship, that this isn't a business. This is your life's work. And there's always that compromise of authenticity. And you find yourself, and I've found myself at times thinking, am I being true to myself right now for a grant that, yes, could help me out, but it feels icky because it's going to cause me to change something about my mission or something about my work. And that's the power of money and the power of systems, right? Where people get to kind of take over your work. So the choices and sacrifices you make around your authenticity, around your growth, and knowing, yeah, I might be growing my business, but am I growing as a person? Am I growing in my relationships? Because you have to have a strong foundation in order to be able to do the work. The work is exhausting, you know that. You're doing this work on top of being in school, and you know, whether you have a family or you have a partner or a child, you know, that was one of the other things for me is I have a loving partner. I have a baby now. I have two parents who are unable to drive and one is sick. Yes, my business is growing. I'm so excited about this. However, if I don't have that foundation of whether it's people or the experiences that are meaningful for you, you'll break down fast. We all know that. I think we've all experienced it in some way, especially with the pandemic. And then human connection, that has been one of the biggest things for me. Finding ways to trust in this work, because there is tokenization. There are people who are willing to share your story, but also exploit your story for their benefit, especially nowadays. There are people who are seeing social entrepreneurship as a way to build on their business too. And I'm talking about these larger businesses. that automatically kind of take you away from being the storyteller. And so I say all of these things because these things can all be really positive, but these things are also the things to think about so that you stay true to your story, because no one can tell your work better than you. Whenever you get nervous, like I've been nervous about this. Sorry, I couldn't, that was, whoo, as I tipped the panel over. But no one knows your work better than you. So remember that when you're thinking about the sacrifices and choices, if you give your hand and your work to someone else, or you share it, I say that, yes, with in a positive way, but also be protective of your work. Be protective of it. Yeah. Thank you. And so what have I been learning in the process in addition to that? Flexibility, instincts, worth, just all of these things that, you know, these are words that we're always hearing about, like how to be flexible in this work, and things are always changing. Following your instincts. If it feels like a no, say no. It's taken me a very long time to say that, and I still have trouble with it, but if it feels like a no, say no, and understand your worth. Your work is not free. And I've had to learn that too, is that my work is not free. I have over 15 years of experience in education, adolescent health. I'm a career changer from medicine to education. Pay me my money. Like, and we are all deserving of that, right? We put the work, we put our time, we put our story, we put our heart into things. We are deserving just as much as anyone else of the work. And the reason I say all of this is because I'm constantly thinking once again about my ancestors and descendants. Whenever I'm honoring these things, following my instincts, flexibility, worth, I'm taking back stolen time from my ancestors and descendants. I'm taking back the stolen time that they have worked so hard for me to be here. And so when I'm thinking about that, even thinking about the idea of spending time with my family, which seems to be a revolutionary act in today's society, I am doing that. I'm spending time with my family because at one point my Anima did not have any opportunity to spend with her 5 children because she was out on the front lines of activism and work. And her children followed, but she didn't get to have that kind of time, or she was working 3-4 jobs in India because my grandfather had died so young. So you're taking back, those are moments more than just saying, I'm gonna take some self-care time. No, self-preservation is an act of political warfare. And that's what Audre Lorde says. So how do you take stolen back time? And so just quickly, the progress that's been made because of the Readery, 6 months, 15 publications, over 40 partnerships with people who are willing to invest in your work, but who are also feel aligned with your work. Like I said, if it feels like a no, just say no, and that's okay. There will be plenty more opportunities. We've hosted 100+ free events with 170 people returning. Also in consulting, before I did education consulting, and this is part of the story, I was doing education consulting. I started a company called Diverse, and it has HER in the middle, like diverse. And it was around representation and retention of women of color in ed leadership. Because when you look at the statistics of women in education leadership, it is almost non-existent. Educators of color are burnt out, tokenized, you name it, in the first year. And so I was doing consulting, but a lot of people were taking the work, putting a statement, and then saying, we're done. It's okay, we don't need you. Or they were taking the work just to say that they were committed to, yep, exactly, diversity. So I was tired of it. I was tired of that. So that's where Rohi's Readery came into place. And then being able to say, okay, I love education. I am still an educator at heart. How do I connect my story and this work to the Readery and work with people who actually want actionable change? And so when I did that with the Readery, I started connecting with schools, organizations, for-profit spaces, and was able to increase 600% in consulting. All because I was tired of making up pitches around, this is what I think you should do for your school. It was, no, I'm going to tell you my story. And if that resonates with you, let's keep working. If it doesn't, no, because if you can't tell your story, then as your story unfolds with the people that you're working with, and if they don't feel aligned to it, it gets really messy. So my thing is be upfront, be honest from the beginning. And if they feel aligned to your philosophy and who you are, then that means that they'll also be aligned to your work. And so with that, over 1,100 attendees have come. We've had 5,000 books distributed to communities, whether it's through inventory purchases, whether it's through donation sponsorships, like with the Literacy Coalition, with the Stonewall Museum for LGBTQ rights, whether it is with the Office of African American, Latino, Holocaust and Gender Studies at Palm Beach County School District. We've been able to take 5,000 books out and make 63,000 in sales at the bookstore within the first 6 months. And most of that, really grateful for that, has gone back into our free educational programming. So we have 15 to 20 events per month that are revolving around all social justice issues for kids and adults. And this is just a little what my next steps are, because I'm always trying to think of what next steps are, but being really intentional. And this would be one big thing. I'd like to pay myself. But this is the ultimate biggest thing, trying to make my ancestors proud. That's my Anama right there again. You can see she's like a powerhouse right there. And then my grandfather is just like, I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy to be here. But that's really, I really want to make my ancestors proud, and then also want to be a good ancestor to my children. And so I know that we're a little deeper break, sorry. So what I can do is, if we could should we take a break right now and then we'll go into. Okay, all right, sounds good. So imposter syndrome. If you feel comfortable, raise your hand if you feel imposter syndrome. Oh yeah, I saw some really quick hands. Yes, all the time. Can I have someone read this for me, please? Yeah.
Imposter syndrome is real. And I think to be a person of color or of the global majority in this country is to constantly think about one's place, to constantly think about, am I welcome here?
Thank you. Thank you. And your name?
Sure.
Shosho?
Yep.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. So imposter syndrome, it's real. It never goes away, no matter how many times, or at least for me, no matter how many times I say, today is the day I'm done feeling imposter syndrome. No, then there's something else that creeps up in your mind saying, no, I'm here. And I think about this quote all the time. And I think that this extends to any marginalized community, and the intersection of marginalized communities, that you're always thinking about, am I welcome here? But every time I think about that, I think about my story. And once again, that my story is powerful. My story has gotten me here today. I want to share my story with others so that we can create human connection. I can create a sense of safety in who I am, but I can also create, hopefully, a sense of belonging in someone else being authentic in who they are. But it's hard to get away from that. So just going back into this idea of your story, I know that this presentation and this conversation that we're having, I was talking to Sarika about this and how I was looking at other master courses and thinking about, this business vocabulary and the jargon, and I'm looking at these other master courses and there's all these like models and things of that nature, and how does that connect to me, and am I an educator, am I an entrepreneur, what is this? And then realizing that by even questioning myself, I am contributing to colonized norms and practices that have been put in place to make me and marginalized groups feel as if we are not part of the conversation, but also purposely not meant to feel part of the conversation. So I explain all of this because the feeling of being an edupreneur doesn't seem real to me. And maybe it's because, once again, I've been following these colonized norms. And so instead of saying, I'm trying to also come from a asset-based approach versus deficit-based approach with my vocabulary. So instead of saying the non-traditional path of entrepreneurship, I'm actually thinking about this idea of we don't assimilate, we recreate. And so we're actually not contributing. So it's not non-traditional. We're actually dismantling and recreating what we believe is to be true of entrepreneurs and of social entrepreneurs. My dad actually talked to me a couple of nights ago about how he read this article, and it was about how many businesses right now are not doing well because they're not adding community value to their spaces. And for those who are, a lot of times are doing it in an inauthentic way, or you can see right through it, right? Or you can see it through a commercial or through, an article that they put out on their website or something, or what they're committed to. But a lot of places are losing money because they're not adding community, human value and connection. And so I think that this is where the work that you're doing also thrives, because you've been thinking about this for a long time, before many of these companies have even thought about it as of importance, around community value, around storytelling, around social experiences, and betterment of community. So, we're going to be actually doing this in a little bit and looking at what are colonized pedagogies. And when we're looking at it, I want you to also just know that this was a document that I've used with educators and adults around the educational approach. But what I hope is that you also see that there is a connection to the entrepreneurship space, or at least for me, it has been that way. But I'm also thinking about this idea of storytelling and how storytelling connects to your business, because I'm thinking about, how do we right the wrongs of the past? How do we ensure that the things that the people who have come before us have done, that every move that I'm making and the story that I'm telling is in some way contributing to righting the wrong of a past? So when I think of a story, or when I'm thinking about my pitch, but I like to say my story because it feels more authentic to me. And I'm sharing it with other people about the Readery and about just how I came to be. I'm always thinking about sort of these three things. And it can be in any way, shape, or form for you. But for me, this is what typically works, is thinking about, okay, if I'm going to talk to someone about the Readery and they tell me more about the Readery. Before I even go into telling you what the Readery is about, I'm telling you who I am. And I'm telling you about the things that I'm proud to be, like an immigrant, a Konkani immigrant, a woman-owned business, all of these things, an educator. So I first think about my identity and how my identity impacts my beliefs, because my beliefs are the reasoning for having my store. So I first think about my identity. And then I'm talking about how I came to understand my feelings of self and the story of that. And once again, connecting it back to why we have the Readery, the lack of belonging, the lack of feeling self-worth, the lack of identity-driven experiences, the lack of mental health supports, because people want to know your who before they invest in your what. And then when you're able to do that, a lot of times, that's where you're able to draw people in because they're finding bonding with you, or at least the right people. And you'll know how to filter that also. We were talking about that this morning. There are seasons of change. There are people that you will find connection with. There are people you won't. And there are people who you thought you found connection with and will find later down the road that you don't. And it's okay to say goodbye to those people because you have to protect your space too. That's one of the biggest things. Protect your space, protect your space. But when you find yourself doing both of these things, what it comes to is authentic belonging, transformative belonging. And the reason I say that, and I wish I had added that, but because when I think of belonging in my past experience, once again, I thought about trying to fit in. But now what I'm thinking about is this transformative belonging of being authentically myself, hopefully you being authentically yourself, and then us coming together and creating a sense of belonging together. And so, you know, I hope that when we're thinking about this story, your story and what you're going to actually be doing today, you're thinking about those pieces. What's my identity? What were the feelings or the words that you even wrote down earlier? And then how does it relate to me being able to connect with you if I have 5 minutes to tell you about my work that I'm doing? Like this morning during our community table, when we were having, breakfast, it was such a beautiful experience because every single person at the table, I could understand, at least get a snapshot of their identity, their beliefs, their feelings through that experience, and then created a sense of belonging. We were all in different spaces of our work, whether it is mental health, whether it was working in another country, whether it is educational work, everything we always found some connection of belonging to each other. And so that's what my hope is when we do go into this exercise. And so I always have to show pictures of my babies because I love my babies so much. And these are over the years for like the past 15 years. But these aren't even all of this, the babies that I've had the honor of working with and teaching. But I put these photos because these are the faces of the babies that saved my life, that changed my life. Like I said, when I was 23, I attempted suicide for the first time and was still trying to find a sense of belonging, but it wasn't authentic belonging. It was me trying to assimilate and navigate to other people's sense of belonging. And so I left medicine. I was focused around adolescent health and moved to New York. And when I moved to New York, I applied to over 250 jobs. And it's so interesting how you can have a bachelor's in biology, a master's in medical sciences with a published thesis. You can go to medical school. You can work for a nonprofit. And I ended up getting let go because of the recession. And you move to New York, and a lot of times it's about who you know. It goes back to that. But that's kind of like everywhere too. Who you know, what systems you're in, what you look like, what your identity is, gender, all of it, you know, your cultural background, you name it. So I applied to over 250 jobs. I actually got 2 callbacks out of all of that. And one of them was for a career-changing fellowship around teaching. And I thought to myself, I've never actually thought about teaching. All I know is that I love working with children. And that was where the start of it was. And so I ended up going into this fellowship. It was stipend based. It was 2 months. At the end of it, they would choose if you were going to get, it was like Survivor mode. They would choose if you would get to have a job in teaching. And I was fortunate enough to be able to receive a teaching job. And so I taught in the South Bronx, and then taught first grade in the South Bronx, kindergarten in the South Bronx, and then moved to Harlem and taught pre-K through fourth grade, both general education and special education services within what you call a 12 to 1-to-1 setting, and then an ICT setting, and was able to teach, lead, coach teachers, you name it. And I was also able to write a identity-driven curriculum for pre-K students. But it's so interesting because when I first joined into teaching, it was really like the idea of being able to work with children. What I didn't realize was in the process of teaching and how it saved my life was that the children that were around me were so passionate about who they were. My students were Dominican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Colombian, Senegalese, Ugandan, and then on the West Coast were Ethiopian, Eritrean, Somalian, and Mexican. No matter what, East Coast, West Coast, the thing that also saved my life was seeing these cultures and communities, these vibrant communities in the Bronx and in Harlem and in parts of Seattle, that these kids were so proud of who they were. You couldn't tell them anything. And I was constantly invited over for community dinners, family dinners, all these things. And it was in that sense that I was starting to see through the eyes of my babies to find empowerment in my identity. And so it's so interesting because you think that you're looking toward these older people to help you and you think you've got it all. And then you're looking at your 4-year-old who is telling you just so much of who they are with such pride. And it makes me so sad because as we get older, we start to tear that down. Society tears that down. So that's why I also think about the work that you're doing and how important it is, because there is this part where no matter what you do at home, no matter what you do with children, and I keep saying with children because that's my space, but no matter what you do, oftentimes they're in a space for 10 to 12 hours in school that is not providing safety and identity empowerment for them. So that's where I say, you know, these babies saved my life and allowed me to get to this space because I was telling my children every day, I want you to be activists of your learning. I want you to be activists and speak your truth and be assertive and all of these things. But then in my own experiences, even as an educator, I wasn't doing the same. I was being tokenized as an adult. I was not getting paid even a third of what some of my counterparts were getting paid. I was doing 3 times as much work as some of my white counterparts. I had a white female teacher put her hands on me. Yes, yes. And I ended up having to leave the school because I was I had caused problems. All of these things, and here I am sitting in front of my kids saying, I want you to speak up for yourself. And then here I am not doing the same. And so I tell you this story because I also want you to know that it wasn't just about teaching. It's not just about education. It's about what are the human connections that you're making with people at any age that can contribute to the growth of who you are as a human, but also your business and your work. Oh, and I just want to say this, I keep this all of the time. His name is Isaac. He just graduated from high school. He wrote this to me on the day that that incident happened. And I remember calling my parents, I was in the Bronx, and telling them, I can't do this. I'm done teaching. This is too much. I was getting back into those suicidal ideations. And my parents were saying, you can do this, because that's also the cultural mindset. Like, you don't give up. You don't, we've sacrificed much more than you already left medicine. What are you doing? Now you're going into teaching and now where are you going to end up? Like, that was the real thing. And Isaac, one day he came, I believe it was the very same day, he wrote me this note. He had nothing, I mean, he didn't know what was happening. He said, Miss Kumar, I know you have been working very hard every day. I know you can do better every day because you are the best teacher in the world. And that was Isaac. And I remember having that. And that was my first year of teaching. First year teachers will tell you it is the hardest. Teaching is very hard, but your first year is brutal. And it's so rewarding and joyful, but it's brutal because of the adults. No surprise. But he wrote this, and I remember thinking like, this was a sign, this was an affirmation. This was my baby telling me that I am here for a reason. And I'm so grateful for him. And he doesn't know, all the things that happened, but I'm so grateful for him because, I could have chosen to leave education and I would have never had the honor of being able to be surrounded by all of these incredible babies. So I wanted to just share that with you. So this was supposed to be the break. But this was what I was also talking about with Audre Lorde. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And so I think of it beyond self-care, but self-preservation, but I also hope you can take this into any space with you, but yeah. And so what we are actually going to do now is talk about, we have a document, and if you wouldn't mind sharing that. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the document and why we're doing this. So, it was very hard for me to figure out how to tie my passion into the Readery, because what had happened was I was teaching, I left because I was so upset with the system. I started education consulting for representation and retention of women of color. And I was traveling a lot for work. And it was amazing. And I was thinking, yeah, I'm doing this work, I'm traveling. And then starting to find hardships with people saying like, yeah, we want your work, but we actually don't want to, we just want to say that we're using it for DEI purposes. But then the pandemic hit, one pandemic, the COVID pandemic, one of many. And COVID hit. I lost all of my contracts because my contracts required me to travel, and I couldn't travel because COVID, but then I also found out I was pregnant. And so on all of that, really lost my sense of identity and who I was. I was very much the type of person that was like, I am going to, I would get to school at 6 a.m. I would leave at 9 p.m. I would be working on the weekends, but I found such joy in my work, and I still do today. But I had no balance in my life in terms, or let me rephrase that. My type of balance was me being in the classroom and working. That's where I found my joy. I think there's this idea of like balance needing to be equal with X and Y and all of that. But I also think that balance is what you find joy in. And so, but I was starting to lose my identity, like, okay, who am I? What am I? Then I had my daughter, and I thought, oh my gosh, now I couldn't get any, I was having a hard time getting any contracting jobs, consulting opportunities. And it was so weird because I was fighting for representation and retention of women, but then people who said they once supported that work were seeing me as a new mom who would probably not have enough time to commit to the work. And that was really hard for me because I had always been seen as someone, at least in the education space, developing this identity as a hard worker, and also that I was capable of doing things, but I was all of a sudden questioning. And that's when I tell you, like, you will go through seasons of experiences and your emotions and feelings and how it always carries back to your story. So all that to say is I'd gotten to this point where I didn't know what to do. And that's where the Readery came into place. Because what I had to do for the first 6 months of not having anyone helping with the baby, with anything, my husband works in healthcare. And so he was oftentimes isolated from me because of COVID. So it was just me. So it was trying to figure out, how do I turn my passion? Like, I have a story to tell. I have a story to tell. I have a story to tell. How do I turn that into something that I can produce for the community? And that's where the Readery came to place. And so the reason that we're talking about this is because I think that there was a roadblock for me thinking about, well, I don't have a business degree. How do I go into business? I don't have any mentorship. I don't have any resources. And even when I tried to apply for a mentorship for an organization that was out to support small minority business owners, and I don't really believe in the word minority because we are actually the global majority. But it also feels like it takes the power away. When I applied for that program, I ended up only being able to get mentorship. It was supposed to be unlimited free mentorship. I only got it twice, and then the person never contacted me back. So even sometimes when you're trying, it doesn't work. And so I say all of that because I think when we can acknowledge and understand what the colonized pedagogies are of businesses, then we can also be proactive in the way that we approach our business and what we can do to make sure that we are either calling it out or saying, this is not part of my business plan, and I'm going to change that. And that's what I had to do, is really reflect on the pedagogies that you have in front of you and see, okay, you know, we've talked about certain things in the classroom, in the school experience, the hierarchy, but here I am to try and dismantle that and show that there is a different business model. And there can be a different business model, and one that can create a sense of authentic belonging with other people who feel the same way. So what we're gonna do right now is you're gonna take about, actually, let's see. We're gonna take about 3 minutes, and I want you to just look at these pedagogies, and it's this one right here. And just look at these questions as you're reading the pedagogy. So which ones resonate with you? How might it connect to your beginning, middle, and future? Have you experienced any of these? And how will you engage in a pitch that ties this piece of dismantling these ways of social entrepreneurship? So obviously there's a lot of questions, but I just want them to be guiding questions for you as you're reading this. You can maybe pick 1 or 2 of the questions and kind of run with that instead of all of them. Maybe have you experienced these or what resonates with you, but take about 3 minutes right now to just look at them, and you can write all over it and mark up which ones you feel connected to. We have about 2 more minutes. One more minute. One more minute. About 30 more seconds to wrap up. And then what I'll have is maybe 2 or 3 people if you'd like to share out. No pressure. Just love to hear some thoughts. Anybody would like to share? All right. So feel free if anyone would like to share anything about experiencing this document, whether it was what resonated with you, whether it was your experiences, how might it connect to your future, your beginning now, or even just how it made you feel when reading these pedagogies. Anybody? Yeah.
I was called an island girl by a professor of mine in grad school. Another professor told me about it, and the connotation that came along with it was I wasn't serious enough about my work. And this is because coming from the Caribbean and the lifestyle that I've grown up with, I wear a lot of color. I wear, clothes that reflect my, I say, bubbly personality.
Mm-hmm.
And in that situation, I was at the United Nations for conferences,
Wow.
and I was made to wear my heavy winter coat inside because it wasn't professional enough. And because of that experience, I was then defined by this professor who worked towards the SDGs as an island girl.
Wow.
Yes. And so now I've integrated that into my personal brand. So the way I dress, the way I interact, the way I compose myself before each day is part of my identity and what I want people to see because it highlights a certain part of who I am as a person.
Thank you so much for sharing. And can you introduce yourself?
I'm Shari. I'm a professor here at Lynn, and I've been teaching here since the fall of 2020.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. That just makes me think of this idea of professionalism. And I resonate so much with that, even in what you wear and how people perceive you and how people have this sort of, once again, these norms of what constitutes as professional in spaces. And when it ties to your gender, cultural, your sexual identity, whatever it is, how people automatically place judgment without getting to know your story. So what are we doing in the process as entrepreneurs to break those stereotypes too? Anyone else? Yeah, thank you.
So when I was reading the paper, I went to another. So these are conversations that we're having. So the one that says is defining the capacity for knowledge. When you're trying to bring down the stuff that has been cultivated inside your head, the conversation that we're having is how you always have to take 16 steps. You compare 16 steps to 1 step. You might be born in the same time as someone who's not a person of color. You in your head always has to take 16 steps. And then we started talking about how we identify, or at least the outcomes of Africa. So we have the same way on when you say simple abundant. So that means it's for the white people. So if you see something really pretty, like nice, you say simple abundant. If you see someone really beautiful, you say simple abundant. Right? So in your head, what you don't know is that you surrender your power because you know him. You say that everything that's beautiful belongs to your wife, and then everything that's not beautiful, you say, it's what we do. So we're trying to break down those things, and we also spoke about how you have to take 16 steps and say that you always have to be exceptional as a person of color. When you stood on the stage, you spoke about I was a hard worker, I was identified. Why did you have to be a hard worker? You know, why couldn't you do just what everyone else did? Why wasn't that acceptable? Why did you have to take the 60%? That was the first thing. And then the next thing I looked at, a bit like being an individual. And I just moved to it. So where I'm from, again, the spirit of Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is the saying that I am because you are. Right. So where I'm from, we greet, you know, we communicate. If you walk into a coffee store, you say, hi, how are you? How's your day going? So now I was thrown into this capitalistic world where it's about me, my needs, what I want. So that was kind of scary for me, existing in a world where I'm the center of my own universe, instead of I'm the center of a big universe. You know, I exist within, you know, tall within one. So I resonated with what's on the paper. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. And what's your name, I'm sorry?
My name is Pranati.
Tanaka? Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you for sharing. Ooh, I resonate with so much, like such goodness right there. And it's interesting because when you were just talking about the idea of we're always thinking about, you're thinking about others, it's very similar in the Indian community, where we're always thinking about like the bigger, broader community and how even just like the multi-generational approach in families, you know, you have aunties, uncles, grandparents, other people that are living within your community or even within your household. And I remember growing up feeling very insecure about that, or even to this day with friends and family saying, or not family, but friends saying, wait, like, why is your auntie living with you? Or why would you want your mom and dad to live with you? I was like, why don't you want your mom? I mean, in certain experiences, but obviously to each their own, but thinking about the individualistic experience versus community-based, and how when we are surrounding ourselves with community, how much greater we are, whether it's someone who is either blood related or not. Most of my family now in the US is actually people who I'm not blood related to, because most of my family lives in India. But anyways, I'm just so appreciative of you sharing all of that and your experience in moving from another country here and what that's looked like for you. So thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, and then, yeah, go ahead.
Definitely not something I think about a lot. So it's interesting to know this. So I grew up in a very small town in North Florida. Colombian descendancy, my family immigrated there. And I mean, a lot of them resonate for sure.
Yeah.
But definitely a lot of times, I probably just tried to be very defensive about it. But like there are definitely times like I go to friends' houses and they wouldn't let me in and actually like people in. And like at school, definitely things like that too. So a lot of like confusion for some things, and I think I'm making connections down my head. But there's definitely a lot of things that I became defensive about in terms of that, and especially in terms of trying to be excellent, trying to prove yourself more than. Because like I was the only like blind kid in my school, like they were all like white.
Yeah.
And so it was this is my story. So it's definitely a lot.
Thank you for sharing. And what was your name?
Pablo.
Pablo, thank you for sharing. And I'm thankful that we're having these conversations. And even as you were just saying, I'm making connections right now. It's crazy how as adults, you know, you see something or you read something and you reflect on a moment from childhood and you're like, oh, wait, that wasn't right. Or, oh, this did not feel, you know, but you don't think about it in the moment because you're never taught anything else or anything different, or the blame is usually placed on you. So thank you for sharing. Yeah.
So for me, it was definitely like all voices included in the curriculum. And for me, just like growing up, I grew up in a impoverished community in the hood, and like anytime there was like a speaker, or like anytime we had to watch a video of like somebody talking, they were usually white, you know what I'm saying? And then like, especially with those speakers in person being, you know, really only white, like, I feel like that kind of put into my head, like, if I need help, it's gonna be from a white person, you know what I'm saying? It's like the only group of people who have the capacity to help people like me, kids like me, are white people. And then my last year of high school, senior year, like right at the pick of time, these three Black women came into our school and spoke to my class about like leadership, how to create a business stuff. They're founders of I believe the company is Flourish Media Co. in Miami. And yeah, like them coming at senior year, right at the pick of time, like was the first time I've ever seen, you know, Black people in my school like speaking to us, you know, from a professional standpoint. You know what I'm saying? So I think like that impact really was huge on me because I feel like I wouldn't be here right now if those three Black women never came to my school to talk to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. The power of identity-driven experiences, right? And where that can take us. I completely resonate with you. Yes, sir.
But there was one in particular where taking resources, ideas, led people. I think growing up as a Brownville community and school system, you know, I have the name calling of, well, there's curry in your house and, you know, doing this for different. And now kind of when it's convenient, how our Ayurvedic medicine is coming into, you know, it's trending and there's the turmeric lattes and, you know, even just seeing YouTube channels and branding someone as a yogi and in my culture, it's like the master of that practice. Always struggling with it, you know, those, I love Indian culture, I love it, and I think that's which I appreciate because I think there's a fine balance between appreciation and liberation. You know, with being reminded of how we can make this different stereotypes.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciation versus appropriation. Oh yeah, Bill, please.
Okay, for me, I circled quite a number, but my mission area right now on campus is trying to improve academic support systems for students, for neurodivergent students, or like the students with learning disabilities, because there is support. We're just trying to like see if we can streamline and optimize. And I realized like I'm just going through a list of things that I want to do, like to interview people and to find out what the state is. But I always get met, it's not necessarily hostile, right? But as always, oh yeah, I understand the cultural thing, or you know, certain places. It's not that explicit, but I'll always be told, you know, yeah, we understand that certain places don't really have XYZ, so maybe you might not be that well versed in. And it's just, I think it's unnecessary because it's like we're trying to do something that everybody deals with, right? Everybody, if you have ADHD, you have ADHD, whether you're here or you're somewhere else. If you have a learning disability, you have a learning disability. I just find it consistently unnecessary that it must always be brought up because then it reinforces the whole idea of otherness or just like yours having to be the not normal way that things are done. And it's not really always the case, you know, and I mean, it gets irritating at some point. It feels like you're always having to at some point you have to just nod and laugh and say yes. But I think that you keep hearing it, if you don't take time to undo it, like go back into your mind and undo it, it just keeps getting deeper and deeper that, oh, you are the unfortunate one, you weren't born in America, you don't know how the right way to do things is. So, oh my God, your path is so much harder because you're having to figure out all of that stuff. But it's not really the case, yeah.
Gosh, thank you for sharing. And just when you when you mentioned the right way to do things and how we've also been conditioned to think and use words like, what is the right way? Well, that's not exactly the right way. That was just that's an oppressive way, actually. No, but I really appreciate you sharing as well. Did anyone else wanna? Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, I think in light of history being taught through Eurocentric white lens, I
Mm,
remember in high school, like for the final exams, we'd have like a bunch of questions and you write an essay on like 2 of them. And then some of the questions would be like very European, like Eurocentric history. And then there would always be a question about the impact of this on minorities.
mm,
And so as you think about what you should be writing, you're like, I know all of this about all this other stuff. And then impact on minorities, all I know is that it impacted them.
Yeah.
I don't really know about anything else. And I think it's interesting when you apply that to the future. And you're like, we're all living through such an interesting time right now.
mm,
Like, is this even gonna be remembered?
mm,
And maybe like part of what we start to see now, like we're like, oh yeah, the COVID situation is improving. Yes, in some countries, but other countries are doing awful. So are
mm,
we even gonna remember this time as something that we were an important part of, or is that just gonna be like, yeah, it impacted us, but like this Eurocentric white ones matters most. So hopefully that will change. in the
Yeah.
future, but it's interesting to kind of apply that to the future and I guess feel disoriented by our relevance in this time right now.
Thank you for sharing. And could you share your name? I'm sure everyone knows, but you,
Megan.
yeah, thank you. And no, thank you for sharing. It's interesting when you were talking about that. I'm just thinking about the stories that we are telling in here as a collective and how much power that holds, because even thinking about the textbooks, right? And it's so interesting because when I taught, we didn't use textbooks. But growing up, we had textbooks all the time. But I don't know if you've seen many textbooks, depending on what state you're in, will talk about content in different ways. So if you have the same textbook about US history in California versus Texas, there's completely different narratives of slavery, of immigration, of all of these things. And so it's, how are we, even just to that point of that question around how it impacted, and there's a lack of conversation about it in the classroom. How can we be sharing our stories for every age so that our babies know the truth and our babies feel empowered? And I say babies, but really of all ages, even, you know, our teens feel empowered in knowing that no matter what is put out there, that their story is impactful, and that they may not hear it from their teacher or from a textbook, or it might not give them a glimpse of it. But I wholeheartedly believe that the work that each one of you are doing is going to dismantle those systems that are preventing our kids from understanding the impact of choices that have been made prior. Because you wouldn't be here doing the work that you're doing if it wasn't for those experiences that other people have had. So I know we're a little bit behind on time. So what I actually wanted to do is, initially what we were going to do is you were going to take this, and this was just a graphic organizer to help you, but we all learn and create and write and share in different ways, but this was just to serve as a template. But instead of doing it now, what I'll say is, if you'd like to take this with you and do some type of practice or exercise, or maybe doing it with someone else or using the words that you had earlier. But the idea was to create almost like a 5-minute storytelling pitch, that if someone asked you about your experience or about your work, that you would be able to integrate, if you feel comfortable with, your why, your beginning, your middle, and then the future of your social entrepreneurship work. And then also on the document, it has those questions that you just went through with the colonized pedagogies, so that if you choose to use those experiences that you've been talking about to bring that into your story, you can reflect on the questions and then, you know, just write all the things that you've experienced in your beginning of life, middle, like what your future is, and then how could you combine that to make a story that could share really the work that you're doing, because it's all really incredible work. So I'll let you do this on your own. All that to say. So some lasting thoughts. And I know we didn't do this exercise, but I wanted to know just what your lasting thoughts, and we'll just take one more minute before the end. And if you have any thoughts around how does the experience of leading with your story feel if you've been doing this, or how do you think it will feel? How could this benefit the sustainability of your venture? Because one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is, okay, this work is so important. I've been really passionate about this work for many, many years. It started trending in 2020, which is like, I have a whole thing about where were you? Where was everyone? But I also think about it's been 1 year, and there was a study shown even around Black Lives Matter and talking about, you know, in 2020, in the height of like multiple pandemics that were happening, over 70% supported Black Lives Matter. And then within a year and a half, it was down to 30%. And this is, and obviously this is like not the whole community, but the statistics were basically showing that people were either had not completed the survey or had not invested in this work, and it was due to trending topics. And it was due to the fact that people were learning, like I said earlier, that the amount of money that people were throwing in ended up not actually going into actionable experiences for people to learn and grow. And so I think about this all the time, like what is the story? How does it connect to the sustainability? Because you want to keep it going at the end of the day. And then what challenges might we face from this approach of telling our stories? So take about 1 minute really quickly to just, I know those are loaded questions, or if you have any responses to this already, feel free to share out. But we'd just love to know, maybe from 1 or 2 people. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll have you, and then I'll have, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Julia.
I think that you made me think about things I've never thought about before. And I feel so empowered. So I wanted to share my story to with everything you said. And just want to hear it. So
Thank you. You have that power.
How you were saying, like, how you do it now and how we do it now. I think leading with your story, it's very scary. It is very scary because a lot of the time, like, inside art, and kind of like Julia said, like, sometimes it's stuff we don't really think about, that it's affected us as much as it has, because it's so personal. And I think from now on, for me, like, leading with it, I think it'll still be scary, but I think I'll learn to love my story a little bit more. Yeah. Because a lot of the times, like, personally growing up with like an immigrant in the US, like, it's been very, I would say, like, sometimes it's like I don't share that story in general because it almost doesn't feel like my story, because I don't feel where I belong. Because I don't identify as an American because I grew up here like every other kid, but there's so many like things going against me and just my existence in this country. But I don't identify with someone from my country because I didn't live there. I lived here. So it's like, it's almost like I've never known where to fall on that aspect. So it's like led to me just suppressing that in a way that, like, up until recently, like, it affects me a lot. But I never like really like acknowledged it because of that.
Thank you for sharing. I think that, and if I may say, honor where you are in this moment of that experience. You don't need to be more knowledgeable, less knowledgeable about your identity. Like this is a journey that you're constantly on. And also I've had to learn like not to find shame in those experiences. Like growing up, I felt ashamed to be Indian and to move from another country. And I told people my name was Jessica, and no offense to the Jessicas out there, but and then my mom found out and she was like, well, why are people calling you Jessica? Including my teacher. But I was just talking about this, how you go through these experiences in life, and the more you share your story, the more empowered you feel, but then also the more emotional it feels, because you're allowing more people to see you, but then you're also discovering more of who you are. And sometimes it also uncovers more trauma and triggers, but it's how do we use those experiences to empower ourselves and others, but also let people know I'm still on this journey. I don't know where I am in my learning, but I know I'm trying to move forward. So I applaud you because you are doing the work. And I can sense like every moment, even just from the breakfast to now, that feeling of empowerment in those moments. So thank you for sharing. Yeah. Yeah, one and then two. Yeah, is that okay? All right. Okay, in the back. Okay. Yeah, sorry. I'm like, just like, yeah, you get it. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Pranoo. It's been amazing so far. More than thoughts, it's more of a question.
Okay.
You know, earlier we talked about how when a lot of the marginalized people share their stories, and it's one of the colonial prejudices that, you know, they're often labeled as helpless or like antagonist. So how do we preserve our dignity while sharing our story?
I love that question. Before I answer, does anyone have any thoughts about that? Yeah, share, please.
I was actually thinking about kind of something similar to that with the first question and how not to feel victimized when telling my story. And I think that that's a really like important part, is not to put yourself in a position where you're victimizing or blaming or anything like that in your story. Like I was taken out of here and I didn't feel supported here, and you know, but really changing and flipping the script of I was empowered through this and I was, you know, placed in this opportunity, and you know, expressing it in that form instead of putting it in a place where like I was sad because of this, because of that, and that's what brought me here. And I think that that's really where the flip of the script comes from and how people view that.
I love that right there. The vocabulary and the way that you use those words to present. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, did you want to add on?
I think with something like that, I don't want to say it's easier said than done, because it can be done, but I think that it comes back to the whole idea of how individualistic life is, at least over here, which is it's easier to push through and say, you know, this is an opportunity for me to embrace the difference, use it for XYZ if you have a good enough circle around you that's reminding you, or at least like you have to feel safe to be able to do anything, right? So even if you don't feel safe in the world that you're living in, if you have your safety at home, like you have your people that are there, then at least it gives you have your cushion to act. But if you're really feeling thoroughly alone, it could get really bad. You could get suicidal. It could get that bad, right? So I think it comes a lot to, I've moved around enough. So I always tell people, I don't play with my friends, right? That's not up for grabs. My friends, my family, I don't play with them, because every single time in every different place I've moved to, they have been the most consistent, right? They are always there. I know I always have a family to go to, regardless of how I'm feeling. So I could feel really terrible in a new place, but I'm not feeling terrible at home. That gives me time to recover. It allows me to slowly feel what I'm feeling without being beat down. It's like, you know, it's like if I'm being beaten, I'm getting water from where I need to get water from. I'm getting fed. I'm getting all the things that I need. So I think a lot of it will have to do with making sure that you find or you create consciously like a parent, like a solid base.
Yeah.
I don't play with it because they will be the most consistent. In the age of phones, you can live in a whole place, not have friends there because you have friends somewhere else. But I think you need people to remind you. Your brain will not always do that work.
I love that. It reminds me of this thing that my therapist says, and it says, my therapist always says, protect your peace. Protect your peace. If it means that it has to let go of people, places, spaces, things, protect your peace at the end of the day. Because when you protect your peace, then you're able to speak from a place of empowerment too. And then last.
So mine was a question.
Oh, yeah.
It's gonna sound a bit pre-written because it's pre-written.
Oh, yeah, no worries. As are my colleagues.
Okay, so you use a lot of strong language. How do you convey this message to adults with concrete belief systems who might not feel comfortable with the language?
That's a great
And I have a
question.
follow-up.
Okay, yeah. I have spent so much of my life conforming to the people who do not feel comfortable. No one asked me about my discomfort. Like, no one has ever asked me about my discomfort. No one has ever asked me about the experiences that my ancestors have had, and which has gone far beyond discomfort. And so it's taken me time though. I'm not gonna say like, this is where I stood even like 10 years ago, but that is where I keep saying I rely heavily on, and every day I think about my ancestors. Because if someone doesn't feel comfortable with the conversation, yes, thank you for coming to the table, but most likely you've had the opportunity to speak your truths, or have had your truths being spoken in society, seen in society, heard in society. Your voice has been at the forefront. So it's now my time to speak. I also think, and I have this come into the Readery, I've gotten some pretty terrible emails, messages, words, confrontations with the Readery. And for me, I will say the only thing it does is for like a split second, it does scare me. I am scared, but more for my safety, because I know what's happening in the world right now, and the safety of my daughter, if someone can boldly speak about my daughter at a young age. But I have to continue to know that my story and my experience, no one can take away from that. And so if that makes you feel uncomfortable, then you can step away. That's kind of where I've gotten to. Now, I have been in situations where we disagree on certain things, and we've had healthy conversation. But at the end of the day, I think the things that we're talking right now is really challenging the legality of immorality. Like, this is not really something that I'm talking about that is for me personally, it's not we can have differences of opinion. It is fundamentally the things that we're talking about and doing right now are killing people of all ages and hurting and creating harm, mental, social, emotional, spiritual, what have you, health. So that's where I sort of think, but I know that I also have privilege. I know also where my privilege lies in being able to speak versus other communities too. So, yeah.
So I guess the follow-up is, I understand that, but at the same time, simultaneously, we want to convey the message to as many people as possible. Because in my eyes, this is great, but if you have a very niche community that can't expand due to this barrier of language, how do you get to that point if it's either this or this? It's kind of a midway point where you meet and kind of join there, or else it'll always be like these groups.
Right.
I guess that's kind of the rough process.
I think the one thing that I can say is resources and exposure. I know that there are people who, for example, come into the Readery and I will say, especially families around LGBTQIA issues with their children and are having conversations around that. And it may not even sometimes be that they are unwilling to talk about it. It might be not having the words, the resources, not wanting to cause more trauma and harm. And so I don't know if that might answer your question, but I think the opportunity to have at least a space for open conversation is one thing that I really do hope the Readery can be. I had a woman and her 2 children come in when the Readery first opened, and according to her political beliefs, she would not be the typical person that you would think would come into the Readery. I'll say that. And it was interesting because she came up to me and she said, wow, I don't see any books that look like me or my children. And she goes, and she said it to the effect, I can't remember her specific words, but she said, in this moment, I get it of what it feels to not be seen in this one moment. But I also feel in this moment that this is not a political issue. This is about every single child having the opportunity to be seen. And that was really, it was one, I thanked her for sharing that, but 2, it was sort of a moment of, I didn't even have to say anything to you. You just came in and felt some type of way and then you shared it. But my hope is that at least the Readery and spaces, we can provide open conversation. So if you don't believe in this community, or if you don't believe in this, and I've had people who say, you know, I am all about Black Lives Matter, but I do not believe in the transgender community. And it's frustrating, it's hard, it's how can you not be for one if you can't be for all, but it's also, okay, well, let's sit and have this conversation. So at least there's a space to have it. I don't know if that, anyone else, yeah, thank you. Okay, okay, sorry. Oh. Hi. Oh my gosh, what?
So here at Watson, we are all about protecting our courage and empowering each other. And today you did more than just that. You empowered us and you shared your story, your sincerity, and your love. And I know I, for one, and I'm sure a lot of other people in this room felt seen and heard for the first time in a way that maybe not before. And like that, it felt like being loved in no other way. So thank you for protecting our courage. And we would like to keep you.
Oh my God, what?
And a small little gift of gratitude.
Thank you. I get a cake. It's usually like for the babies. We have cakes at the Readery. I'm totally wearing this cake. Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Can I give you? I don't want my mask. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, thank you everyone for this opportunity to share my story with you. I have stickers and also my business card with my email. So I would love to connect with each and every one of you. If it's sharing your story or just connecting via Zoom, or if you want to share some feedback, anything at all, if you have questions. But I am so grateful and I'm so inspired by you and the work that you're doing. And if the Readery can also be of any support in any way possible, the space is yours. So please feel free to take ownership in that and know that it's your space too. So thank you again. Yeah. I think I remember.
Thank you so
And
much.
those are my babies. Little peanut. She has always had her fist from the very beginning, so.
Before we pop out, Pranoo, as a tradition, we usually take a group photo. Outside with your cape, so the same spot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll make our way outside, everyone, for the group photo, and then you can be on your way.